Resident Evil from 1996, Gothic 1, Classic, X-Plane 12, DCS World. These are games that until this week simply did not work on Linux, and now they do. Valve just pushed Proton 11.0-1 into stable, the first major version bump since Proton 9, and the most significant compatibility update in over 2 years. If you play games on Linux, or you've been holding off switching because of one specific title, this release is worth your attention. Here's what we're going to cover today: what actually changed under the hood and why it matters beyond just a list of game names. The EA desktop situation, which has been quietly breaking dozens of games for months, and how Proton 11 finally resolves it. The component upgrades, Wine 11, DXVK, VKD3, dProton, and what each one actually does for your frame times. And we'll look at what's still missing, because no release is perfect. There's also one component that Valve deliberately held back from this release, and the reason why is actually pretty interesting. We'll get to that. Let's get into it and see what else this release has in store. Before we get into the specifics of this release, it is worth spending a minute on what Proton actually is. Because the way it is structured explains why a version bump from 10 to 11 is a bigger deal than it might look. Proton is Valve's compatibility layer. It is what lets Steam on Linux run Windows games. It is built on top of Wine, which is an open source project that has been translating Windows system calls into Linux equivalents since 1993. But Wine alone is not enough for modern games, so Valve wraps it with a set of additional components. DXVK, which translates DirectX 9, 10 and 11 calls into Vulkan. VKD3D Proton, which handles DirectX 12. And a collection of patches, tweaks and fixes that Valve maintains on top of the upstream Wine codebase. Each major version of Proton is a rebase, meaning Valve takes the latest stable Wine release and reapplies all of their custom patches on top of it. That is significant because Wine 11, which is the foundation of Proton 11, shipped with NTSync support, a new kernel synchronization primitive that reduces CPU overhead for multi-threaded games. It also brought improved Vulkan H.264 video decoding, which is why you are seeing fixes for intro videos and cutscenes across a wide range of titles in this release. So when Valve says rebased on Wine 11, that is not just a version number. It is months of upstream improvements landing in your Steam library all at once. And that context matters for understanding why some of the fixes in this release look unrelated on the surface. A crash in Helldivers 2, stutter in Titanfall 2, or lag spikes in the Steam overlay. These are not individual bug fixes. They are symptoms of the same underlying synchronization improvements that Wine 11 brings. Let's talk about the fix that's going to matter most to the largest number of people watching this. A few months ago, EA pushed an update to the EA desktop app, their launcher for games like Battlefield, FIFA, The Sims and Mass Effect. That update quietly broke the Steam overlay for a large number of EA titles on Linux, and it also made several games outright unplayable. If you try to launch Battlefield 2042 or FIFA or any EA game through Steam on Linux after that update, there's a good chance you hit a black screen, a crash on launch, or a launcher that refused to open. The root cause was in Xalia, the accessibility and controller support layer that Proton uses to interact with Windows-style launcher UIs. EA's update changed how the launcher communicated internally, and Xalia's lockup detection logic couldn't handle it. The result was that Xalia would deadlock when interacting with the EA app, which cascaded into the Steam overlay failing and games not launching. Proton 11 ships with Xalia 0.4.9, which specifically addresses this. The lockup that happened when interacting with the EA app is fixed. The Steam overlay now works correctly with EA games again. And the controller support layer has been extended with new bindings for a long list of EA and other game launchers. This is the kind of fix that doesn't make headlines because it's a launcher issue rather than a game issue. But it's the fix that's going to make the most difference to the most people in their day-to-day gaming on Linux. And while we're on the topic of launchers, there's a similar fix in this release for the Rockstar launcher. If you've ever tried to launch GTA 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2 on Linux and noticed the launcher pop-ups rendering incorrectly, overlapping text, broken buttons, that rendering issue is also addressed in Proton 11. We'll come back to what that means for the broader launcher ecosystem in a moment. Now let us go to the games that are newly playable. I want to do this a bit differently than just reading a list, because the types of games that are now working tells you something interesting about where Proton compatibility gaps have historically been. There are two categories here. First, games that were already working in Proton Experimental, the beta branch, and are now promoted to stable. That list includes Resident Evil 1996, Resident Evil 2 1998, Dino Crisis 2, DCS World Steam Edition, Shogun Total War, Warhammer Vermintide 2, Metal Gear Survive, and a handful of others. These were working, but only if you manually opted in to the experimental branch. Now they just work out of the box. The second category is more interesting. Games that are newly playable for the first time period. Gothic 1 Classic, X-Plane 12, Breath of Fire 4, Deadly Premonition, and Unknown Faces. These had no working Proton path before this release. X-Plane 12 is worth calling out specifically. It is a serious flight simulator used by real pilots for training, not a casual title. The fact that it is now working on Linux through Proton is a meaningful signal for professional and semi-professional users who have been locked into Windows for simulation software. Gothic 1 Classic is the other one I would highlight. The original Gothic from 2001 has had a notoriously difficult compatibility history on modern systems, even on Windows. Getting it working on Linux through Proton 11 is a genuine technical achievement. And then there is the broader list of games with improved fixes in this release. Cyberpunk 2077, The Witcher 3, Helldivers 2, Satisfactory, No Man's Sky VR, Titanfall 2, Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. These were already playable, but with specific issues that are now resolved. Helldivers 2 had a crash in high enemy count missions. Titanfall 2 had keyboard input stutter. No Man's Sky VR mode had broken after a recent game update. All fixed. The pattern here is that Proton 11 is not just adding new games. It is closing the gap on the rough edges that made some already playable games frustrating to actually play. Let us go a level deeper on the component upgrades, because this is where the long-term impact of Proton 11 lives. Wine 11.0 is the foundation. Beyond NTSync, which we covered earlier, Wine 11 brought improved Vulkan H.264 hardware video decoding. That is why you are seeing fixes for intro video playback across a wide range of titles in this release. When games use H.264 encoded cutscenes, Wine 11 can now offload that decoding to the GPU rather than the CPU, eliminating stuttering issues. DXVK 2.7.1 handles DirectX 9, 10, and 11 translation to Vulkan. The update here is incremental, mostly stability fixes and edge cases. You will notice Valve deliberately held back from updating to DXVK 3.0. This is a deliberate, conservative choice, not an oversight. The reason is that DXVK 3.0 has stricter GPU driver requirements, and Valve wants to ensure a fallback path exists for users on older hardware. VKD3D Proton 20260.410 handles DirectX 12. This is the component that matters most for modern AAA titles. The April 2026 snapshot includes improvements to ray tracing pipeline handling and better synchronization for modern games. FAX 2605 is specifically for ARM64EC builds. This matters if you are running Linux on an ARM device like a Snapdragon X laptop. FEX is the x86 emulation layer for these ARM machines. The 2605 release improves compatibility with games that use AVX2 instructions. The combined effect is that Proton 11 is a performance and stability improvement for a wide range of hardware configurations. By the way, I just pulled up our channel analytics, and it turns out about 90% of you watching right now are not subscribed yet. If you have been finding these Linux deep dives useful, hitting subscribe is the best free way to support the channel. Chapter 6. The launcher problem. Rockstar, REDLauncher, and why this keeps happening. Earlier I mentioned the Rockstar launcher fix. Let's come back to that, because it's part of a broader pattern that's worth understanding if you game on Linux. The problem with third-party launchers, EA Desktop, Rockstar Launcher, and REDLauncher, is that they're essentially Windows applications running inside Proton. which is itself running inside Linux. Every time one of these launchers gets a significant update, there's a risk that it breaks the Proton compatibility layer in ways that the game itself doesn't. Proton 11 addresses 3 of these specifically. The Rockstar Launcher pop-up rendering fix means the UI elements that were overlapping or displaying incorrectly now render properly. The REDLauncher fix, which affects Cyberpunk 2077 and The Witcher 3, resolves a long-standing issue where the launcher was taking an unusually long time to exit after you closed the game, which was causing Steam to report the game as still running. The REDLauncher fix is subtle but meaningful. If you've ever launched Cyberpunk 2077 through Steam on Linux and noticed that Steam kept showing the game as running for 30 to 60 seconds after you exited, that was REDLauncher not releasing its process handle cleanly. Proton 11 resolves this, which means your Steam playtime tracking is now accurate and Steam won't block you from launching another game while it waits for the previous session to close. The broader point here is that the launcher problem isn't going away. As long as major publishers run their games through proprietary launchers, Proton has to maintain compatibility with each of those launchers independently. Valve is doing that work, but it means that a Proton update can sometimes be more about fixing launchers than fixing games. Chapter 7: Controllers, VR, and the stuff that just works better now. There are 2 areas in this release that do not get as much attention as the game compatibility list, but are genuinely significant for specific groups of users. Controllers first. Proton 11 ships with Xalia 0.4.9, and beyond the EA desktop fix, this version adds controller support for a substantial list of game launchers and installers. We are talking about launchers for Final Fantasy X/10-2HD Remaster, Batman Arkham Asylum, Mortal Kombat Complete Edition, Zero Escape, the Nonary games, Metal Slug XX, and about a dozen others. This matters specifically for Steam Deck users and for anyone using a controller as their primary input device. Before this fix, launching some of these games on a Steam Deck would drop you into a launcher UI with no controller navigation. You would have to reach for a keyboard or mouse just to click through the launcher before the game started. That friction is now gone for these titles. There is also a fix for controller hot plug with the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C and similar controllers that expose multiple HID devices. If you have ever had a controller that stopped being recognized after you disconnected and reconnected it mid-session, this fix is for you. VR. No Man's Sky VR mode is playable again. This broke after a recent game update and has been a known issue for several months. Proton 11 restores it. Microsoft Flight Simulator also gets improved VR controller tracking. VR on Linux through Proton is still a niche use case. The ecosystem is fragmented and hardware support varies significantly. But the fact that Valve is actively maintaining VR compatibility fixes in stable Proton releases signals that they have not abandoned this path. For the users who do run VR on Linux, these fixes matter. Chapter 8: What Proton 11 does not fix. Let's be honest about what Proton 11 does not solve. Because this is where a lot of frustration in the Linux gaming community comes from. Anti-cheat. This is the big one. Games using easy anti-cheat or BattleEye in kernel level mode still do not work on Linux, unless the developer explicitly enables the Linux compatible version of those anti-cheat systems. Proton cannot work around kernel level anti-cheat. It is a fundamental architectural limitation. The games that are blocked by anti-cheat are blocked by the game developer's decision, not by Proton's capabilities. The list of games that still do not work because of anti-cheat includes some of the most popular multiplayer titles: Valorant, Fortnite in its current state, and a number of competitive shooters. This is not a Proton problem, it is a publisher decision. And until those publishers choose to enable Linux anti-cheat support, Proton cannot help. DXVK 3.0. As I mentioned earlier, Valve held back from shipping DXVK 3.0 in this release. DXVK 3.0 brings meaningful improvements for DX9 and DX11 games, but it requires newer GPU drivers. Until Valve is confident there is a reliable fallback for older hardware, it will not ship in stable Proton. expected in a future point release. Performance parity. Proton has closed the gap significantly over the last few years. But there are still games where running through Proton on Linux is measurably slower than running natively on Windows, particularly for DX12 titles that rely heavily on shader compilation. The VKD3 Proton team continues to improve this, but it is not solved. None of this is a criticism of Proton 11 specifically. It is context for setting realistic expectations. Proton 11 is a genuinely strong release, but it is not a magic bullet. And the Linux gaming experience still has gaps that require publisher cooperation to close. Chapter 9. How to switch to Proton 11 right now. Let's make this practical. Here's exactly how to get Proton 11 working for your games. The simplest path is to let Steam handle it automatically. If you have Steam Play enabled for all titles, which you can set under Steam settings, then compatibility, Steam will use the recommended Proton version for each game. For newly supported titles, Proton 11 will be selected automatically. If you want to force Proton 11 for a specific game, right-click the game in your library and go to Properties. Then go to the Compatibility tab and select Proton 11 from the drop-down. This is useful if a game is currently using an older Proton version and you want to test whether Proton 11 improves it. A few things to keep in mind. Proton 11 is not always the right choice for every game. Some older titles work better on Proton 7 or Proton 8 because of specific compatibility quirks handled differently in those versions. If a game breaks after switching to Proton 11, switch back to the version that was working. ProtonDB at protondb.com is your best resource for checking what other users have found works for a title. For Steam Deck users, Proton 11 will roll out through the normal Steam OS update process. You don't need to do anything manually, it will appear as part of a system update. If you're on the stable channel, expect it within the next week or two. If you're on the preview or beta channel, it may already be available. One last practical note. If you're using Proton GE, the community-maintained fork, you'll want to check the releases page. These builds often include fixes that aren't in stable Proton yet, but they also require manual installation through tools like Proton UpQT. Chapter 10. The bigger picture. What Proton 11 means for Linux gaming in 2026. Let's zoom out for a moment, because Proton 11 doesn't exist in isolation. Linux is now at 3.69% of the Steam user base, according to the June 2026 hardware survey. That's a number that would have seemed unrealistic 5 years ago. The Steam Deck is a significant driver of that, but it's not the whole story. More people are choosing Linux as a desktop gaming platform, and Proton is the reason that's viable. Proton 11 arriving in the same week as the Steam Machine revival, Valve's push to bring SteamOS to third-party handheld hardware is not a coincidence. Valve is investing in this ecosystem because the numbers justify it. The practical implication for you is this. If there's a game you've been holding off on because it didn't work on Linux, now is a good time to check again. The ProtonDB database is updated constantly, and a game that was broken 6 months ago may be fully playable today. Proton 11 is a meaningful step forward, not a revolution, but a steady, well-executed improvement that makes Linux a more viable gaming platform for more people. If you want to go deeper on how the Proton stack actually works, Wine, DXVK, VKD3D, and why each component exists, that's a topic worth a dedicated video. Leave a comment if that's something you'd find useful, and I'll put it on the list. For now, if this breakdown was useful, a like helps the video reach more people who are on the fence about Linux gaming. Subscribe if you want to catch the next deep dive. And if you want to support the channel directly and get some perks along the way, check out the join button below to become a sudo user or get root access. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.